Today we're testing out 7 action cameras ranging from $30 all the way to $300 to see which camera is best for filming Hot Wheels POV videos. We'll be testing, comparing, and ranking each camera based on video quality, features like frame rates and stabilization, size, price, and most importantly, how they fit on a Hot Wheels car. And we'll see if they can survive this track. If you've ever wondered which action camera is worth strapping onto your tiny ride, then this is the video for you. Let's get rolling, but first, let's introduce our cameras. Up first, we have the GoPro Hero Session. I got mine for a steal on Facebook Marketplace for $30. Normally, these things cost anywhere from $50 to $200. It maxes out at 1440p at 30 frames per second in 4:3 aspect ratio, or 1080 at 60 frames per second in 16:9 aspect ratio. Being a GoPro, yes, this little camera is waterproof, but it doesn't have stabilization and requires a micro SD card to record. Up next, we have a camera that doesn't really have a name, so I'm going to call it the Waterproof Sports Camera. I bought this little thumb-sized action camera for $40 on eBay, but it normally sells for $60 on Amazon. It only records 1080p at 25 frames per second with no stabilization, but it is waterproof, has a magnetic back, and it has 128 gigabytes of internal storage. Up next, we have a camera that I didn't know existed until making this video, the Caddx FPV Orca. Again, I got this on Facebook Marketplace for $50, which normally they cost around $95 if you can even find one. This colorful camera maxes out at 4K 30 frames per second, but can do 2.7K at 60 frames per second and 1080p at 120 frames per second. Despite its name, the Orca is not waterproof, but it is equipped with anti-shake stabilization and requires a micro SD card to record. Up next, we have another camera that I didn't know existed until making this video, the Polaroid Cube Plus. I bought mine for $50 on eBay. It's actually slightly smaller than the other cube-shaped cameras in this video. The Cube maxes out at 1440p at 30 frames per second, or 1080p at 60 frames per second. It also has a very strong magnetic base. It is splash-proof, not waterproof. It does have some stabilization, and it requires a micro SD card to record. Next up, we have the RunCam 5 Orange. Now, I'm borrowing this one from my brother, but normally these things run about $100 to $110, and they're pretty easy to come by. The RunCam 5 maxes out at 4K 30 frames per second, 2.7K 50 frames per second, and 1080p at 120 frames per second. It does have some stabilization. It also records gyro data. It is not waterproof, and it requires a micro SD card to record. Next, we have the DJI Action 2. Now, this is the camera that I have used for all of my POV videos up till this point. You can get one for about $200 to $280. The Action 2 maxes out at 4K and 2.7K at 120 frames per second, but it can also do 1080p at 240 frames per second. It's equipped with rocksteady and horizon lock stabilization. It is waterproof, has a magnetic base, and it has 128 gigabytes of internal storage. Now lastly, we have the Insta360 Go3. Now I did try to get my hands on the Go3S, but I can't find it anywhere for renting, so the Go3 is what we got today. The Go3 still costs about $300, while the 3S costs over $400. It maxes out at 2.7K 30 frames per second, but can also do 1080p at 50 frames per second. It has flow state and horizon lock stabilization, it's waterproof, has a magnetic back, and it has 64 gigabytes of internal storage. Now that we've introduced our cameras and you've seen their specs, let's see how well they all fit on a Hot Wheels car. Up first, we're going to mount the GoPro Hero Session, Caddx FPV Orca, and RunCam 5 easily onto the GoPro zoom-in car with no modifications needed. The DJI Action 2, being slightly larger than the GoPro Hero Session, requires some slight modifications to the zoom-in car, which obviously I have already made for all of my previous content. That being said, it's fairly simple to get this camera onto a car. The Polaroid Cube Plus is slightly smaller than the Hero Session, so it doesn't just snap into place on the zoom-in car. But because of its strong magnetic base, we're going to use the same car as the DJI Action 2. Up next, we have the waterproof sports camera. Now, because of its odd shape, we won't be able to just simply plop it onto the GoPro zoom-in Hot Wheels car. So I took the Nerve Hammer and Bone Shaker base and glued a custom-shaped galvanized steel tie plate onto it. The magnetic connection is strong enough to hold it in place. We will be testing out both horizontal and vertical mounting options. So it is a bit of work to get this camera to work on a Hot Wheels car, and to be honest, I didn't feel like seriously altering the GoPro zoom-in car and gluing something to it just to make this camera work. Lastly, we have the Insta360 Go3. And since the Go3 is very similar in size to the waterproof sports camera, we'll be using the same cars and mounting options. So not the easiest to mount, but definitely doable. And again, I didn't feel like seriously altering the GoPro zoom-in Hot Wheels car just to fit this camera since I am only renting it. Now that we've got all these cameras on a car, let's get them on the track. Up first, the GoPro Hero Session. Let's talk about the GoPro Hero Session. In terms of video quality, this thing is just fine. When we talk video quality, we're talking about resolution, clarity, how it handles colors, how it handles light. We're talking field of view. We'll be ranking everything on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. The GoPro Hero Session gets a solid 6. Being 2025, 1440p is passable, 1080p is fine. It is a GoPro, so you get the GoPro look. It handles colors really well, and the field of view on this thing is very wide. One of the biggest categories for ranking these cameras is going to be the features that the camera has. As far as features, the GoPro Hero Session doesn't really have that many that are useful. Yes, it has 60 frames per second at 1080p, 1440 at 30 frames per second, but the 1440p is just a stretched up frame. It's not any wider than the 1080. I would normally use this thing at 1080p, 60 frames per second because of its lack of stabilization. The extra frames do help it feel a little more stable. The wide angle lens on this thing also helps it feel a little more stable. I love that this thing is waterproof. It's a GoPro, so you kind of expect it to be. Also, the build quality on this thing is really good. It feels tough, feels like it can take a hit, a fall. When you're filming Hot Wheels cars, it is definitely going to take a fall, so having something that's tough is definitely a plus. So for features, I give this camera a 6. And now for the size. It is a great size for this camera. It is nearly perfect. You know, I personally love this shape and size for an action camera for filming just about anything, but in particular, Hot Wheels POV videos. The lens being center mass is just so perfect. I give the Hero Session a 10 for size. I'm just really disappointed that GoPro abandoned this style of camera after only 2 generations. Imagine what we could have now if they had kept this going. When we talk price, we're talking about the price that they normally go for, not exactly the price that I got these for, because that's just not fair. Not everyone's gonna get the same price, so I'm going with kind of an average and what you would normally find. I'll give the Hero Session a 5. I think it's a bit overpriced for what you get in 2025. Normally these things cost anywhere from $100 to $200. I think that's way overpriced for what you get in 2025 with it only maxing out at 1440p. Personally, I wouldn't spend any more than $60 on this camera. And finally, for the most important aspect of our ranking, how it fits on a Hot Wheels car, the GoPro Hero Session gets a 10. I mean, this and the Session 5, which is the later version, the GoPro zoom-in Hot Wheels car was made for this camera, so easily a 10. So overall, the GoPro Hero Session gets a 37 out of 50. Next, the waterproof sports camera. All right, let's talk about the waterproof sports camera. In terms of video quality, this thing is a potato camera. I gotta give it a 1. It says 1080p, but it feels more like 480p, just stretched up to 1920 by 1080. It doesn't handle colors very well. It doesn't handle light very well. Of all the cameras we tested today, spoiler alert, this is by far the worst. This camera has very few features to offer. The only features that I like are the magnetic back, it's waterproof, and it has internal storage of 128 gigabytes. But it only has one recording mode at 25 frames per second at 1080p, so there's no slowing down the footage. Stabilization is non-existent in this camera, and the rolling shutter on this thing is awful. I'm giving this camera a 5 because the magnetic base, waterproof, and internal storage are really the only thing it has going for it. And now for the size, this camera is very small, just slightly bigger than the Go3. The only issue is the lens is so far off center mass that mounting vertically is really the only option that you have. I did try mounting it horizontally, but it makes a weird view of the track being off center. Also, it's a bit on the wide side when you do horizontally, so it will run into things. The only usable way to film with this camera is vertically. I'm gonna give it a 6. The price to me for this camera is too high for what you get. I still feel like I got ripped off for paying $40 for this thing. Personally, I wouldn't spend any more than $20 or $30 on this potato camera. I gotta give it a 2. As far as mounting on a Hot Wheels car, this camera gets a 5. It is very small, but it is slightly taller than the Go3, so this was the hardest to mount. It is quite a bit of work for what you get out of this camera, so it gets a 5. So overall, the waterproof sports camera gets a 19 out of 50. Next up, the Caddx FPV Orca. Let's talk about the Caddx FPV Orca. Video quality, 4K, looks really good. My biggest issue is there is an internal ND filter on this camera that you can't turn off or remove, so everything is always going to be a little darker. Now you do get 4K, 2.7K, and 1080p out of this camera, and they all look pretty good. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do 2.7K in this camera. I'll get to that in a minute, but for video quality, I give the Orca an 8. For what this camera is, it does have some pretty decent features. 4K 30 frames per second, 2.7K at 60 frames per second, and 1080p at 120 frames per second. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to access the 2.7K because the app, first off, it's easy enough to connect to the app with the camera, but you can't do anything with the app. The only thing you can do is monitor. I tried changing so many settings. I tried going to 2.7K. I tried turning on image stabilization, which wouldn't work. I've seen all the reviews on the app. Everyone's having that problem. It's not waterproof, so a few points lost there. Also, the build quality, it's just plastic on the outside, so it kind of feels a little cheap, like if it falls, it's gonna break. Also, the little LED indicator lights that show you what resolution and frame rate you are at, and if you're recording or not, are really hard to see in daylight. Overall, I gotta give it a 5 for features. The size of the Orca is very similar to the Hero Session, so I do like that. I do have some complaints, and I'll get to them in just a minute, but overall, I gotta give it an 8 for size. The price for the Orca, I would say, is somewhat reasonable. The only issue is these are really hard to find. I got mine on Facebook Marketplace for $50. I personally wouldn't spend any more than $60 or even $50 on this thing because of the app being a really big issue. So for price, this camera gets a 7. As far as fitting on a Hot Wheels car, this is where I have to complain just a little bit. It does fit on the GoPro zoom-in car, but it's a lot tighter, and the lens protector is so big that it makes the camera kind of tilt up just a little bit when sitting in the GoPro zoom-in car. Now, of course, without the lens protector, it probably fits perfectly fine, but I'm not willing to risk this camera to do that. That being said, I gotta give this camera a 10 for Hot Wheels fit because there were no modifications needed. So overall, the Caddx FPV Orca gets a score of 38 out of 50. Next up is the little Polaroid Cube Plus. All right, let's talk about the Polaroid Cube Plus. In terms of video quality, it's fine. 1440p, it's nice to have it, but again, it's no wider than the 1080p, so you're just getting a little bit more vertical space. The field of view is a bit narrower than the Hero Session. The colors and light aren't really handled very well on this camera, and I know this isn't a deciding factor at all, but the audio quality on this thing is horrible. So this camera is getting a 4. The Cube Plus does have some pretty decent features, my favorite being the magnetic base. It also has a magnetic back. I don't really use it. The magnetic base is very strong though. The buttons are nice, the app is easy to use. However, the app was very difficult to get. I had to go to some third-party website, which felt like I was gonna download a virus. Thankfully, I didn't. It works. The stabilization on this thing is better than not having it, but it's more just anti-shake stabilization at best. It's not waterproof, but it is splash proof. I didn't test that feature, but So for features, I gotta give the Cube Plus a 6. The stabilization does leave a lot to be desired. The size of the Cube Plus is where I gotta gush over this thing. It is the perfect size. I love it. It is smaller than the Hero Session. You could put this thing on the GoPro zoom-in Hot Wheels car, cut off the sides, and it would probably fit through any booster or turn that you throw it at. The only issue is its length kind of limits it to maybe only fitting on the GoPro zoom-in Hot Wheels car. But still, I gotta give this thing a 10 for size. For the price, I gotta give this thing a 7. It's pretty hard to find one of these days. I paid $50. Normally they're like $60, $70, or $80, but maxing out at 1440p in 2025, or whenever you're watching this, it's just not enough. As far as fitting on a Hot Wheels car, sure, it doesn't fit perfectly on the zoom-in car. It does require the slight modifications, but they're easy enough to do modifications, so I gotta give it a 9. Overall, the Polaroid Cube Plus gets a 36 out of 50. Up next is the RunCam 5. All right, let's talk about the RunCam 5 Orange. I was actually pretty surprised by the video quality out of this thing. 4K looks great. Sure, the colors are kind of just 2.7K, 1080p. They both look perfectly fine. I do wish it was a little sharper though, so I gotta give it an 8 for video quality. The features for the RunCam 5 are pretty similar to the Orca, but they work. 4K at 30 frames per second, 2.7K at 60 frames per second, and 1080p at 120 frames per second. And the stabilization is definitely noticeable on this. Unfortunately, like the Orca, it's not waterproof, but the build quality definitely feels a little better. It's got a rubberized outer shell, so it definitely feels like you can take more falls and be okay. The app is very easy to use, and you can actually change settings on it, which is really nice. Overall, I give it an 8. The size of the RunCam 5 is very similar to the Hero Session, so I gotta give it a 9. It's great. The price for this camera is pretty similar to the Orca, being around $100, but this one is definitely more deserving of that price tag. For one, the features on this camera work like the app, and it's still available and pretty easy to come by. So I gotta give it a 9 for price. As far as fitting on a Hot Wheels car, I have no problems with it. Even with the lens protector on there, no issues whatsoever. This camera gets a 10. Overall, the RunCam gets a score of 44 out of 50. Next up, the DJI Action 2. All right, let's talk about the DJI Action 2. The video quality out of this thing is, in my opinion, the best. The wide field of view at 4K or 2.7K or 1080p, the colors, everything about it is just phenomenal. It gets a 10. The features on the Action 2 deserve a lot of praise. 4K at 120 frames per second, 240 frames per second at 1080p. My only issue is it does tend to overheat at the higher frame rates and higher resolutions, so you gotta be a little quicker with how you use it. The stabilization on this thing is incredible. Now, I mainly use Rocksteady. I think I've only used Horizon Lock maybe once or twice. The magnetic base is really nice on this thing. I only wish it was a little stronger. The build quality feels really good. It's all metal. I love that it's waterproof. It has 128 gigabytes of internal storage. The only potential breaking point is its large lens and the touchscreen on the back. I haven't had any issues with that because I do use screen protectors and lens protectors, but this thing easily gets a 10 for features. The size of the Action 2 gets an 8. It is just a little bit bigger, wider, and taller than the Hero Session. However, it is narrower, giving it a little bit more flexibility for its uses. The price for the Action 2, I would say, is pretty reasonable for what you get out of this thing. Anywhere from $200 to $280 depending on which version you get. I really wish that they still sold the 128 gigabyte version. They only do the 32 gig version, which I just don't think is enough. But this thing gets a 9 for price because it is packed with features. As far as fitting on the zoom-in Hot Wheels car, this thing gets a 9 because it's not a perfect fit. You do have to make the modifications, but like I said earlier, they're simple modifications. Also, because of its depth, you can mount it on more than just the GoPro zoom-in Hot Wheels car, which is my normal setup now. Overall, the DJI Action 2 gets a score of 46 out of 50. And finally, we have the Insta360 Go3. All right, let's talk about the Insta360 Go3. The video quality out of this thing, even at 2.7K 1080p, is incredible. I have no complaints. This camera gets a 10. This little camera is packed with a ton of features. Most importantly, it has stabilization, and it also is smart enough to know that when it's sitting vertically, it knows to film horizontally. The stabilization on the Go3 is incredible. I like that it's waterproof. The magnetic back is really strong, and unlike the waterproof sports camera, this thing just feels really well built. Also, having internal storage of 64 gigs, it does come as 128 gigs. My only real gripe is that it maxes out at 30 frames per second at its highest resolution. That being said, this camera makes up for it and some, being packed with all the features, especially stabilization. This camera gets a 10. The size of the Insta360 Go3 is slightly smaller than the waterproof sports camera, so it was a little easier to mount, meaning the center of gravity is just a little lower. However, this camera is just a little heavier, so it kind of evens out. But because of its size, again, you can mount it just about on any Hot Wheels base. I did the Nerve Hammer and the Bone Shaker. So this camera, especially when it's sitting vertically, can make it through any turn at the right speed. However, I just really don't like this shape. The lens being off center to the mass of the camera obviously always makes it a little more difficult to mount. So I gotta give this thing a 7 for size. The price for the Go3, to me, is a bit ridiculous. It's still $300 in 2025. There are two newer versions of this kind of camera from Insta360 with the 3S and now the Go Ultra. However, it is packed with a bunch of features. That's a really nice locking mechanism with the magnet. I gotta give it a 7. Like the waterproof sports camera, and like I said earlier, this one was a bit difficult to mount, being a pill shape and it's tall. It doesn't just plop onto the GoPro zoom-in car, so a lot of modifications are needed to make this thing fit. So overall, I gotta give this thing a 6 for how it fits on a Hot Wheels car. So overall, the Insta360 Go3 gets a score of 40 out of 50. So overall, here's my ranking for the cameras. In 7th place, with a score of 19 out of 50, the waterproof sports camera. In 6th place, with a score of 36 out of 50, the Polaroid Cube Plus. In 5th place, with a score of 37 out of 50, the GoPro Hero Session. In 4th place, with a score of 38 out of 50, the Caddx FPV Orca. In 3rd place, with a score of 40 out of 50, the Insta360 Go3. In 2nd place, with a score of 44 out of 50, the RunCam 5 Orange. And in 1st place, with a score of 46 out of 50, the DJI Action 2. This ranking did surprise me. I thought the Insta360 Go3 and the Orca would score higher. Now, if I had been able to get my hands on the Go3S, the Hero Session 5, and the app to actually work for the Orca, things would have been different. So if you have the money, go for the DJI Action 2. Again, they run about $200 to $280 depending on which kind and which style you get. But of course, if you're on more of a budget and only can spend about $100, the RunCam 5 is a great alternative. And then if you're willing to spend the extra money and spend the extra time for the Go3 or the Go3S. Now, if you're on a tighter budget, the GoPro Hero Session is a pretty good option too, as well as the Polaroid Cube Plus. Again, you're gonna have to do a little bit more work to get it to fit on a Hot Wheels car, but I wouldn't pay any more than $50, maybe $60 for either of those cameras. Then you have the Orca and the waterproof sports camera. And to be honest, I can't really recommend these cameras. The waterproof sports camera, it's a potato camera. It only shoots 25 frames per second at 1080p. And then the Orca, it's really hard to come by. The app doesn't work, and it's not waterproof. So that is my ranking of these cameras. Do you think I was fair? Do you think I was wrong? Let me know in the comments below. There are quite a few more cameras that I would love to try out. Some that I've never heard of before, some that have just come out, and some that are yet to come out. So if this video does really well, I'd love to make a part 2. To see more POV Hot Wheels action, subscribe to the channel and click up here if you want to see how I altered the GoPro zoom-in Hot Wheels car to fit the DJI Action 2 and the Polaroid Cube Plus if you have or want one.